Hello and welcome to the Weekly Rushes, your rushed rush through all the weekly movie and streaming news, distilled down, brought to you as a short, sharp, caffeinated shot of just celluloid and streaming joy. I can't see anything, so I'm going to have to take those off. Ah, there you are. Thank you very much. Okay, so welcome to the Weekly Rushes. And as ever, we're going to be starting with some of the news stories that are causing controversy, drama, headlines, all that sort of stuff. So first up, it feels like we've been doing this story for a year, and we have been doing this story for a year, I believe, or even more. Alec Baldwin. It's kind of hotting up the whole kind of court case. There's a big standoff in many regards between Baldwin and the district attorney for New Mexico. It feels like the district attorney for New Mexico has really got the bit between their teeth, really doesn't like Alec Baldwin's attitude, and really wants to punish someone. And I think it's kind of fair enough, but there's a sense in which they feel that if someone's died, there has to be some culpability. Someone somewhere or something somewhere must have gone wrong, and it's about finding out where it went wrong and punishing, in a sense, accordingly. A few developments in this story across the week. He's being sued for negligence, obviously, but he's also being sued by the Ukrainian parents and sister of Helena Hutchins, which is kind of curious because Helena Hutchins' husband stopped his particular lawsuit. Helena Hutchins' parents and sister claimed that they were going to be brought over to America by Helena Hutchins over time. The lawyer representing them says anyone who is responsible for her loss must be held accountable. And they say there's been no reaching out by Baldwin, no apology. You know, this is odd because, as I say, Helena Hutchins' widower did reach a settlement back in October last year in their wrongful death action with Baldwin and the Rust producers. And in fact, there was that curious moment, you remember, where it seemed like they were all going to go back into production on Rust, and Helena Hutchins' husband was even going to be one of the producers. Another story that broke this week was the idea that Alec Baldwin, whilst being given gun training on the set of Rust, the prosecutors claim that he was talking on the phone. He should have spent an hour being given training with the gun, but only did it for half an hour. And the Santa Fe district attorney also listed a number of other issues that could potentially put Alec Baldwin in a vulnerable position. Baldwin was not present for required firearms training. After failing to show up, he received a 30-minute on-set training session, but he was distracted by being on the phone with his family. They claim he exhibited reckless behaviour in the lead up to her death. He had pointed the firearm at Hutchins in the lead up to the incident, violating gun safety rules, but that assumes he knew it was loaded. Baldwin had not performed the required safety checks. He broke protocol by letting Gutierrez Reed, the armourer, leave the church set. He did not deal with safety complaints on set. He did not use a replica firearm for the unscheduled rehearsal, and he allowed the hiring of the armourer, who had worked on just one production before the movie, which showed he failed to demand the minimum safety standards, protocols and requirements on set. To be honest with you, on a low budget film, I can pretty much imagine that they will have cut corners on salaries, on experience. Obviously, a less experienced armourer will be cheaper than a more experienced armourer, and all that kind of stuff. And the district attorney finally says Baldwin's deviation from known standards, practice and protocol directly caused the death of Helena Hutchins. So I think things are tightening up. I was originally thinking he wasn't going to be prosecuted, but I'm not quite so sure now, and I do wonder whether he could be done for corporate manslaughter. I mean, I do wonder whether the Santa Fe district attorney is kind of fancying their role here quite a bit, and is kind of looking forward perhaps to the sort of cinematic adaptation of this story. The DA says that she believes that Alec Baldwin is trying to distract from the fatal shooting with what they call fancy lawyers. So there's very much, I think there's a sense here of the New Mexico sort of DA taking umbrage and feeling that this is Hollywood waltzing in without any responsibility and without any culpability or answerability for the death of a woman. Of course, we've talked about the Andrea Riseborough fiasco drama surrounding the Oscars, the way in which she was nominated for her movie For Leslie. People keep talking about the fact that it only made $27,000 or pounds at the box office. That is a remarkably small amount, it has to be said. But, are the Oscars about box office pull and all that kind of stuff? Not necessarily. Michelle Yeoh, who's been nominated for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, she's been sort of wading into the debate. It became a race debate that I was talking about last week. It became a bit of a kind of hot potato in terms of of race issues in terms of Viola and Danielle, the stars of The Woman King and Till. The idea that, you know, Andrea Riseborough got through with an incredibly sort of low-key performance in a low-key film that was supported by the likes of Gwyneth Paltrow, Kate Winslet, Charlize Theron, Amy Adams, Ed Norton, Jennifer Aniston, etc. And so the feeling is that the film got such an enormous kind of groundswell of support that it nudged Viola and Danielle off the nominations list. Other people have been coming out in defence. Paul Schrader, Christina Ricci, they've been defending Riseborough, saying, you know, it's elitist, the elitist academy that was investigating this. And I think generally you fall into two camps. In fact, I think Andrea Riseborough is the unlucky one in the middle. We've said this before. But Michelle Yeoh basically coming out and saying, look, you know, I love Viola and Danielle to the extreme and wish we were all getting Oscars, but it's tough. There's a tricky one here. What if this year it was felt that Viola and Danielle didn't match the performances of all the other actresses and they happen to be white? Should diversity be about there being someone there regardless? I mean, I haven't seen either of the films, so I can't say. But I think it's a really tricky one. It's a really tricky one when you come to awards and nominations and what have you. You know, you don't know to what extent they've truly gone for the best performances and to what extent they've kind of not paid attention to, or perhaps they have paid attention to. I mean, I think that doesn't get said enough, to the other performances, and maybe just didn't feel they were the same as all the others. And I think it's important to know that a film that's kind of more esoteric and less sort of, I don't know, a film that wasn't in the Oscars sort of crosshairs already. I think that's one of the issues I have with this. We don't often talk about how films are sort of auctioned off or competed for, or how ideas, before even cameras have rolled or even before cast has been decided, get sold in the marketplace. We don't really often talk about the marketplace of Hollywood. And we talked last week about Zach Cregger's new or second film called Weapons. He's the director of Barbarian, a huge indie horror success. We loved it. It was a fantastic film. Well, that one success, which was they got a huge return on a $10 million investment. I think it made something like 50 million back. His next film is called Weapons. Not an awful lot is known about the film, but there's been a real kind of scrap and a scramble to get the rights to this film. New Line, who are the producers behind it, well, they are now the producers behind it, bought it or it was sold to them for a remarkable $38 million. $38 million. That amount includes the budget, and it also includes the director, Cregger. I mean, blimey, talk about being jettisoned to the top of the Hollywood sort of ladder. He's got a $5 million fee to direct, and he's also got that amounts to a $10 million fee when you add it to his fees for scripting and producing. I mean, bidding started with Universal, and this is the thing, Jordan Peele really wanted this project, and as we know, Jordan Peele is a sort of Midas touch, isn't he? Although Nope didn't do quite so well at the box office, it's a fantastic film. His 3 films are brilliant. Candyman, he exec produced, absolutely sensational. And his company, Monkey Paw, tried to get this. So him and Universal, he's on a tie-in with Universal, they bid $7 million less than New Line, but Jordan Peele was even willing to forego his contractual back end, which means whatever money he could make from it being a success. He was willing to sacrifice that in order to secure the deal, but they couldn't do it. They went with New Line. Zach Cregger went with New Line, and apparently Jordan Peele was really pissed off. He doesn't strike me as the kind of man to get pissed off, but he was really miffed. And I think there's some crossover in the comedy agents that he has and Zach Cregger has it, the director, and Jordan Peele's left that agent who looks after his comedy work. So some real argy-bargy behind the scenes, but it just gives you a sense of what the excitement and buzz is like around the director of Barbarian. Anyone here a fan of You, the series on Netflix starring Penn Badgley? I think we're into season 4 now. He was talking on a podcast this week about how he didn't want to do any scenes of great intimacy, or sex scenes essentially, in the series, out of respect to his wife. He wanted it due to his fidelity to his wife. It wasn't his design. He was talking about the fact that he just didn't want to partake in these scenes. He likes the action scenes and what have you, but he didn't want to do any of the sex scenes. And this struck me as an odd story because, okay, well and good. I think that's really good. And the producers respected that, and the producers shifted the film around. I mean, I'm not an enormous fan of sex scenes in films anyway, but sometimes they're necessary if you're trying to portray a psychopath or a serial killer, a murderer, and all that kind of stuff. It's part of their sort of grooming process. So I think in that sense, you can almost see why it's necessary. My thought about this story is, would a female actress be afforded the same respect? Would there have been such a compliant response to a female lead asking for no sex scenes? And could this be something that develops a little bit more further down the line with other performers? This is a bit of a silly one. Ben Stiller. We watched Zoolander the other night. What did we watch it for? Was it a Christmas film? I don't know. It made us roar with laughter. Lots of people hated Zoolander too. I found it hysterical. I thought it was really funny. Anyway, Ben Stiller's just been talking about the fact that obviously he's resurrected Derek Zoolander for a Super Bowl ad for Pepsi. I think it's Pepsi's new Pepsi Max or something like that, one of the Diet Pepsis. And he's back. And as Ben Stiller says, he's really, really, really ridiculously good looking. And Ben Stiller's been talking about the fact that he's brought him back. He's also been mentioning whether, or talking about discussing whether there could be a third Zoolander. And he says that actually, the idea for a third Zoolander isn't so outlandish and ridiculous now, because we've really progressed since the first two Zoolanders into this social media age of selfies, looking at oneself. Ben Stiller says the idea of him staring at himself, at his reflection, and just being kind of enthralled by himself is probably a little bit indicative of where we are at as a society today. I think in the age of social media and selfies and how people are kind of obsessed with their images, he makes sense now. Was Zoolander ahead of his time? I kind of think he's right, and I kind of wonder whether it would be kind of quite a good thing to resurrect him. This week, Disney announced their finances, their quarterly results. Bob Iger, who's back at the helm of Disney, announced, I think, 7,000 redundancies or thereabouts. But he also announced some of the future pipeline projects that Disney are going to go for in order to kind of turn around their finances and their fate, in a sense. They're under pressure a little bit. So they announced in their earnings call that there's going to be a fifth Toy Story. How do we feel about that? Has Toy Story run the gamut? Has it served its purpose? And my worry, so he mentioned a Toy Story 5, he mentioned a Frozen 3, and he mentioned a Zootopia 2. And you just wonder whether the cynical need to make these for financial reasons will creep into these projects. I mean, the first, with each Toy Story that's come along, their box office is reduced, but they still have made over $1 billion at the worldwide box office. So you can understand why Disney are looking at those intellectual properties and wanting to mine or squeeze as much as they can out of them still. But my worry is that they'll be tainted by the whiff of desperation, if you like, Disney desperation. He did mention, and I know Maddie and Kiki will be pleased about this because they're enormous converts to Avatar: The Way of Water. He has announced that Disney World, or Disneyland, is going to feature the Avatar Pandora experience. So you're going to be able to immerse yourself in the world. And apparently the girls say people are experiencing Pandora depression, where they come out and they're so depressed. And I think there's a really strong reason for this. I think youngsters have gone in to see Avatar after the bleakness of war, COVID, lockdowns and all this kind of stuff. And I think the ability for quite a long time, 3.5 hours, to immerse yourself in total escapism, a world or a realm that looks so beautiful, and in fact is not entirely dissimilar to the most beautiful parts of this planet that we're slowly destroying. I think you can see why that immersion can lead to depression when you come out of the cinema. So the idea that you could walk into this in one of their theme parks is remarkable. And of course, their theme parks make up an enormous part of Disney's turnover and potential for profit. James Mangold, who's a director who seems to be getting just, bigger and better and the most enviable projects thrown at him. James Mangold, he did Ferrari, he did Ford v Ferrari with Christian Bale and Matt Damon. I thought it was much better than I was expecting it to be. He's also just finished Indiana Jones, the 5th outing, and that's coming out in June, I believe, this year, so that's going to be exciting. And he's also got a Bob Dylan film coming out starring Timothy Chalamet. That's going to be something, isn't it? Timothy Chalamet as Bob Dylan. I can't stand Bob Dylan. I find his voice annoying, I find his songs annoying, I find him annoying. So, maybe Timothy Chalamet can bring me to Bob Dylan, but James Mangold has directed that too. But James Mangold is also excited about directing potentially a film for DC called Swamp Thing, which is a very famous, character in the DC Comics world. He was one of my favourite, if not my favourite, DC Comics character, Swamp Thing. I would really like that. I think the design of him, I think his story, I think the world he's in, I really like Swamp Thing. So I'm kind of hoping that does happen. But again, James Mangold on top of that, wow. Is the name of the director I'm about to say right now something that we just have to not talk about? Should we just forget his name? Woody Allen. Woody Allen. What are your thoughts on Woody Allen? Obviously, he was hit with a huge sort of Hollywood cancel campaign, part of the hashtag Me Too sort of movement. You know, the accusations from his former partner, Mia Farrow, that he kind of abused and molested his adopted daughter, Dylan, when she was 7 years old. Obviously, he married his stepdaughter. I think however you look at that, you've got to say that's pretty strange, marrying your stepdaughter. Anyway, Woody Allen's 50th film. I mean, believe it or not, for anyone who's too young to know this, a Woody Allen film coming out, and they pretty much came out once a year, way back before the scandal, was a cause for excitement, and I would trot along really excited about watching another sort of, you know, intelligent comedy. Then they became more and more sort of, what's the word, simplistic and cliched and just not so funny, and that was before the scandal, and then the scandal kind of closed things down. He lost a really lucrative Amazon deal, didn't he, back in 2016. Well, his 50th film has been made. It's a French language film, so that shows you how he's been squeezed out of the mainstream and the West, and he's had to make a film in France. It stars a whole host of relatively well-known French actors. Woody Allen describes the film as a story of romance, passion and violence set in contemporary Paris, and this has got a distributor. It's on sale in Berlin, and there's a hope, you know, perhaps there's still a market for the Woody Allen films. Let's face it, he sort of sits almost in that same area as the director Roman Polanski, where some people are very sort of, no, nothing has been proven, and then there's a whole heap of other people saying, well, none of the evidence is looking positive. But what are your thoughts? Should he even be making films? Some of the more sort of, you know, projects that are just being made. David O. Russell, director, producer, writer. He made Amsterdam recently. It was a total flop. I couldn't even bring myself to see it, but I heard it was an absolute turkey. He made American Hustle. I quite like that. I thought that was good. He's got a new project called Super Toys. Really odd project. And here's the tagline for it. Two groovy 70s toy sales reps go on a life and death mission to save themselves, their marriage and their live wire 12-year-old daughter while on the road in middle America. Weird. And he's just cast two key actors, really. Keke Palmer, who we saw recently in Nope. She was excellent in that. And Sacha Baron Cohen, obviously Borat. And the jury's out for me on whether Sacha can do serious or not. But you know, two great actors or two great performers. Is it going to be a dark comedy? It sounds kind of crazy. Super toys, road movie, selling toys. I mean, don't get it. You may have heard us discussing quite a while back on the Weekly Rushes the sort of twisted horror film called Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. This is due to be released soon. I think there's high hopes for this when it's released on the 15th of February for it to do really well. Well, Frake Waterfield, or Reese Frake Waterfield, who is the chap behind this, what's already seeming like a cult hit before it's even hit the screens. He's got two other projects. He's mining this furrow. He's going to stay with this rich vein of exploiting childhood classics and turning them into gore fests. He's doing one, or he's discussed in an interview, that he wants to do Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare, a dark reimagining of J.M. Barrie's children's book with a drug-addled Tinkerbell. And his other project that he's discussing is BAMBI, The Reckoning, in which, you know, Bambi, I think, becomes a revenge thriller where Bambi starts to go on a bloodletting, vicious killing spree. You know, I don't know what character Thumper would play there. I mean, if there's violence, I suppose he will thump a lot of people. But yeah, what do you think of that? Bambi, should he leave these classics alone, or is it sort of some twisted meta fun for horror buffs? Some streaming news now. Zazie Beetz, who you'll probably know from Joker, and Tom Hardy, who we all know for just being so uber sexy and wonderful, though of course I don't fancy him at all. I'm just jealous of the fact that every woman I know does fancy him. They are to appear in a series for Apple TV called Lazarus. It's a curious kind of premise. It's about a sort of skinny, emaciated, sort of poverty-stricken looking man who's found walking down along a train track. We discover that 13 years earlier he and his sister went missing, and then Zazie Beetz plays a sort of private investigator or a detective who's looking into the suggestion that when they went missing they had both been killed by a serial killer. Tom Hardy's obviously going to play the brother of the brother and sister combo that went missing originally, and Zazie Beetz as the inspector is going to be the one who kind of starts sort of looking into the story. Are we looking at Tom Hardy actually playing a serial killer? I think it's not as it seems. I think there's a serial killer there, but who is the serial killer? And if they're not dead and Tom Hardy's alive, perhaps he's been up to no good. That could be interesting. Lazarus coming to Apple TV. This is interesting. Ben Stiller again. Sorry, Ben Stiller for a second time. He's about to play. This is intriguing. The title roles in a drama version of a documentary I saw a couple of years ago called Three Identical Strangers. These are three kids, triplets, that were separated at birth and then managed to sort of intercept each other within their lives. I mean, if you can believe it, two of them ended up in the same college and discovered that they were brothers. Ben Stiller is going to be playing all of them, or certainly is going to be playing two of them, because tragically one of them committed suicide. And the story does span across decades. In New York, these three identical strangers who were triplets rather, they set up a restaurant, they became sort of celebrities, they sort of were featured in the news and all that kind of stuff. And Ben Stiller is to play the two surviving ones. It's a story of kind of, wow, coincidence. It's a story of serendipity. It's a story, and it's a tragic story. It's a story that ends in all sorts of tragedy, and I think he's a good fit. I mean, he kind of looks a little bit like them. So Ben Stiller to start in a series of Three Identical Strangers based on the documentary. You may have seen on the Popcorn Junkies Instagram account that a big sort of TV story, or potentially a streaming story for Netflix, or a streaming film, is Scoop. A film about the infamous interview between Emily Maitlis of the BBC and Prince Andrew, in which he was talking about his relationship or not with Jeffrey Epstein. As we know, it led to a complete collapse in Prince Andrew's image, profile, legality. I mean, it was an absolute clusterfuck of a mess for Prince Andrew, and you just wonder how it was allowed to happen. Well, this film is going to feature and profile the process of getting the interview. Gillian Anderson is in there playing Emily Maitlis, and Rufus Sewell is in there playing Prince Andrew. A couple of other characters in there are Keely Hawes, who's playing the private secretary to Prince Andrew, so she would have been key in saying to him, yeah, do the interview, this is a good idea. What a bad idea. And Billy Piper is playing the producer of Newsnight, the current affairs show that managed to secure the interview and booked him. So I think it'll be interesting. I mean, I'm not entirely sure whether Prince Andrew is a pull, even when what's going to be better than the interview. I do wonder if this is a little bit too niche, just the origin story of an interview, because we know what happened in the interview. I don't know, maybe it'll be intriguing. Maybe it's full of drama and intrigue. They're hoping it will throw a spotlight on and uncover the inner machinations or machinations of the BBC and the royal family, two Titan-like institutions in the UK. Animated series coming up here, and a really curious animated series, co-created by Priscilla Presley. This is called Agent Elvis. The trailer landed earlier this week. I haven't had time to watch it. Matthew McConaughey is playing Elvis in an animated feature that's coming from the studio that gave us Into the Spider-Verse films, that are sensationally animated films. The official logline for this, and don't forget, Matthew McConaughey is playing Elvis, Agent Elvis. This isn't Elvis as we know him. This isn't the sort of, shake your pants Elvis, though I'm sure there'll be about whatever it is he does. Elvis Presley trades in his jumpsuit for a jetpack when he becomes a secret government spy, battling the dark forces that threaten the country he loves, all while holding down his day job as the king of rock and roll. Where the hell has this come from? Who took some mushroom tea, drank some mushroom tea and smoked the biggest spliff on the planet? This is batshit crazy, weird stuff. And that's starring Matthew McConaughey, who himself is a bit weird too. Which brings us to films of the week, and we've got a really mixed bag of movies this week. First up, we've got Women Talking. This is a film that has done incredibly successfully on the festival circuit. I think it missed out on a couple of nominations at the Oscars. I think it was nominated for Best Picture, but not Best Director. A staggering cast. It's got Claire Foy, Rooney Mara, Jessie Buckley and Frances McDormand in it. It's based on a book, or inspired by a book, by Miriam Toews, can never pronounce it, Toews, which I think I read many years ago, a memoir about being part of a Mennonite community. Women Talking, this film is sort of about a colony of Mennonites, and it's the process of revealing a really horrendous secret about what's been going on in this community, or this sort of colony, if you like, religious colony, for some years. It pivots around the idea that men have over time been drugging the women and raping them. So I don't think this is going to be for the faint-hearted. It's quite a serious subject. There's going to be some fabulous performances in there. I mean, those 4 actresses alone. Ben Whishaw's in there, I believe, as well too. And it's about women talking about their situation and uncovering this horrendous sort of secret, if you like. Next up is a film called Blue Jean. I think this is a British movie. It's kind of partly inspired by a law that was brought in whilst I was at school called Section 28, which essentially was a law that was designed to discourage teachers from theoretically promoting homosexuality. It was to outlaw the promotion of homosexuality, which of course, just think about it, what a ludicrous concept. I think Thatcher was the one who tried to bring this in. As a friend of mine at school once said, they can't teach me history, so how on earth can they teach me to be gay? But, you know, it's wrong. So this is a film set in 1988. It's inspired by the real-life story of 2 lesbian teachers. It pivots around the idea that one of these lesbian teachers it basically has her sort of her sexual orientation. A student threatens to reveal her sexual orientation, and she has to try and hold on to her job and somehow hold on to her sanity. And finally, we have the film I won't be watching this week is Magic Mike's Last Dance. Very popular franchise. Obviously, there's the Magic Mike stage show in London. This stars Salma Hayek, obviously Channing Tatum again, and Matthew McConaughey's in there too. This is, we find Magic Mike, or we find Mike Lane, Channing Tatum's character, down on his luck, working in a bar. It's a very sort of cliched and hackneyed trailer. I think Salma Hayek tries to kind of pull the band back together, get them back on the stage and reinvigorate both his pecs and his fortunes. Nadia said she wanted to see it just for the dancing. I'm not entirely sure whether she was being genuine there. So if you fancy a bit of eye candy, a bit of groove and move in your crutch area, then I'd say that Magic Mike's Last Dance is probably it. And I'm kind of hoping from the title that this will be his last dance. So there you have this week's Weekly Rushes, all your weekly movie news and streaming news in one harsh, caffeinated shot to the neck.